Well, welcome everyone to, we're going to have just a final wrap-up, very informal roundtable discussion. It's been a jam-packed 2.5 days of presentations. We thank everyone first for making this huge trip to Edmonton. I've called it the outer edges of the universe. We've all come to the outer edges of the universe, and thank you very much for taking the time
It's not the end of the earth. You can just see it from here.
Thank you to everyone for preparing wonderful presentations that were remarkably coherent and thoughtful. We hope that really this conference is really just phase one. This is a tremendously important issue, as you all well know, is of great broader audience to many other scholars and the general public. And so we are planning to do a double issue publication in the Canadian Slavonic papers that will be dedicated to the issue of religion and war in Ukraine. This final gathering, before we actually gather at Heather's house for a far more relaxed time, is to begin to scope out some common themes that struck you, or new ideas, new insights, sort of what are you taking away from this conference after 2.5 days of hearing all these presentations? We're thinking about that in terms of sharing insights for starters, and secondly, as a way of beginning to structure the publications that will come out of this. We are women of ambition, and so we hope to have first the double issue of the Canadian Slavonic papers, and if our budget can permit, we hope to extend that into then a book as well. So after we discuss common themes that we might want to think about, we want to get into the nit-grit about publications and timelines and things of that nature. And I apologize to anyone who might still be online. That last part might not be of great interest to you, but if you're welcome to stay along if you're interested at all in thinking about what are some of the takeaways that people who are involved in these issues have come to after hearing 2.5 days of presentations. I would open the floor. There are several different microphones that are floating around. We want to, as I mentioned earlier, this is meant to be very informal, sort of thinking out loud. What are some of the takeaways? What are some of the main points or insights that you gleaned?
I'll lead off a few ideas that, just of things that we were thinking about that informally chatting at breakfast that we were already hearing and that I've been thinking about for the rest of the day. But we were thinking about how important the issue of good governance is and how that came up in such a variety of different ways, and how good governance during the war is key to a successful post-war. And that came up in terms of law, it came up in terms of administration of religious life in Ukraine, it came up in terms of the preservation of religious sites and so on. And so that was an important theme that came up. We have talked a lot about religion as a sort of a source of markers, and war as a time when those markers are shifting. So that was a theme that I think also was developed further today in a number of ways.
I have very similar feelings what Heather mentioned. I think that we discussed in this brief today so many issues, and it's quite clear that religion is a part of this war, and it's really kind of in arms, but it can also be, and it's quite clear, a chance to change the religious communities, to make them much more resilient, and to make much better cooperation between different churches, confessions, communities. And a lot of presentations really showed that most of the religious communities are facing these challenges, and they are rethinking not only their attitude to the war, but also towards themselves. What will be after the war? What will be their role and for recovery and reconstruction, and how to make Ukraine really in this situation strong, on the one hand, providing religious freedom on the one hand, on the other hand, how to balance the situation when religion is really used by the country aggressor, by Russian Federation, as a weapon. But it's a fantastically great opportunity, like a catharsis period for having much better situation in developing the religious freedom and developing religious communities and cooperation.
I want to kind of piggyback on what you just said about opportunity and catastrophe, kind of the paradox of those two things coming together. The pattern that was resonating with me today in listening to Father Cyril's presentation and Pablo's presentation is with all of the religious actors and their agency that we've been discussing is a crisis of trust. That's come out numerous times in our conversations, a lack of trust in priests who are arguing with one another and using hate speech, a lack of trust in the Pope, a lack of trust in the WCC, a lack of trust in Orthodox patriarchs. And with that, I wonder if there is some opportunity down the road to reflect on what kinds of opportunities and what kinds of reflections might come from how this relates to other crises that have been simmering for a long time, the sex abuse scandal, Father Cyril's example of indoctrination camps. And then finally, what seems, at least to me, not being the expert on this in the room, but by observation, already going over the cliff of rapid decline of religious observance. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but a rapid decline in the percentages really in most places in the world, including in Eastern Europe. I think there's an opportunity to explore that further, what the relationships are there and what kinds of new agencies, new styles, models of leadership might emerge from the rubble, sorry for the metaphor, of this catastrophe.
It's a pretty stimulating conference, I think, a really stimulating conference. And a couple of questions that had been nagging, in the back of my mind were answered by it. I agree that it's very important that any transfers of churches be done legally, that they be done peacefully, and not, with paramilitaries or anything like that, or through state administrative fiat. The bill, the draft bill before the Ukrainian parliament about banning the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, what I was wondering about was what was the end game here? Why would the state want to ban an entire church? Because they're certainly not going to go away. They'll acquire the church buildings, and the communities will remain. And I think it's kind of, in Dmytro Avok's opening talk, the idea that if the church is open and the religious community is practicing, you can actually go in and see what they're doing. But if they're meeting in homes and they're meeting underground, then it's really problematic. I mean, it didn't solve my question. It didn't answer my question about what the end game they desire is, but it certainly showed the consequences to me more clearly of that end game if they decide to ban those 8,000 parishes or whatever. I mean, it's just so many interesting things were said. And then I really found, and this is a talk on the Muslim communities, very interesting. Oh, my son was telling me, as he follows all the news, that the Hamas October 7th thing was a Russian provocation. That wasn't settled, but you could certainly, once I heard all your talk, I realized, well, yeah, they were quite realized that adding a new front in the American arming of Israel was going to work in Russia's favor. I know those aren't the general things, but, there are things I took out. Many, many, many things have just caused me to have an interesting conversation with Lydia. She really explained to me a lot about inside what goes on in the UOC. Not necessarily very favorable, I would say, your views. So these kind of conferences where we discuss these difficult questions, I think are very important. I also think that it's really good that we had a conference sponsored partially by the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies that didn't just take the community line and defend it, but actually began to educate people about the issues. Altogether, I just think this was a very stimulating conference. I'm sorry it's going to end, except that I do have to get back to my own work.
I also want just to join in saying how amazing this conference has been, be together and to have such interesting and insightful talks. It was again a little bit like a flashback for me from the conference in Lviv, where you invited me first for this working group on religion, lived religion in the Black Sea region. Because for me as a theologian, the anthropological perspective is really fruitful and inspiring. I had other talks also with Zippelmer in Berlin and with other colleagues. So after this conference, that the most interesting thing is that coming from the theological perspective, also of the institutional sphere of churches and religious community, not only the churches, there's a lot of frustration and understanding that how destructive all these religious institutions are acting on this global political sphere, and there's a lot of just frustration, I think. And then when we ask where the hope comes from and where some signs of opportunities come, this is from the grassroots level. And I think this was present in the whole conference, that we have those both levels, those two levels, which seem to be quite contradictory and need really more conversation, more dialogue with each other. Can be inspiring for each other, but also can show that where, from the religious point of view, where the points are where we can go further, as you planned with this conference also, to look further and what can be the possibilities, where the really big problems lay. And for me, this is some kind of paradigm in this conference, which was in almost every panel, and which would be maybe interesting to further also have in mind for the publication, to make this maybe some kind of red line or red thread in the conversation, to have those both levels of grassroots level and institutional level, and how they differently impact the talk, the discussion, the academic discourse about war and religion.
I just may jump on this, to use the ecumenical language, a kairos, a momentum for changes, for reconsidering, at least some reconsiderations regarding the structures, the structural side of the church life. It applies to the ecclesial structures in the global orthodoxy in the first place. Apparently, it's the kind of the most obvious target for changes, but also it applies to the structures of peacemaking and conflict resolution, as those structures have been formed since the World War II. Apparently they don't work anymore. At least they don't work the way we want them to work. This applies, well, to the WCC, it applies to the probably some venerable and maybe not so much venerable traditions of the Holy See's diplomacy. Many things need to be reconsidered. Of course, they can go on as they are. They tend to not pay attention to the need for changes, but if they want to remain relevant, they will eventually need to reconsider themselves. That's one thing. And the second thing regarding, I'd like to come back to the anatomy of the war, something that we discussed, we addressed, the anatomy of the war. What is the nature of this war? How has it happened? It has been identified, the religious component is an important one in this war. At the same time, I think it's important to stress that it is not really a religious war, even though it is war driven to some extent by religion, or by the religious rhetoric at least, or the instrumentalized religion, which is both, as Father Nick said, it's a catastrophe and is an opportunity indeed. We are troublemakers, I mean the religious people, which draws attention to us, which makes religion relevant again through its troublemaking input. I hope that as a result of this war, there will be an increase, not just, to the Eastern Christian Eastern studies or Eastern European studies, but also the Christian studies, theological studies. Theology is relevant all of a sudden in a bad way to the modern secular world. It cannot be ignored, at least, and it needs to be addressed again. And this gives hope that we will have more jobs as a result, which is good. That's something I think that is important. That is my take, at least, from this conversation. Thank you.
Just to go on what Nick was saying about kind of the crisis of trust, other kind of terms that came out to me from that are the prevalence of suspicion that we saw throughout a lot of the papers, as well as the kind of logical necessity to create and delineate who are enemies, and how that's done in various circumstances in various ways on lots of different sides. That I think is a kind of recurring theme that happened a lot.
I don't know about the rest of you, but I get irritated about a lot of things. But one of them is when they announce that the war has made the Ukrainian nation. It consolidated the Ukrainian nation. How many times have we read that recently by particularly our colleagues in Russian studies? Oh, yes, the war made these processes go, and now they've shown that they are a nation. So that always involves the problem of, is it really at that point, or are we not looking further back? And I think that's also something maybe in an introduction that has to be dealt with. How much of these topics are the war and has changed it, and how many of them, and of course the war is whether we're going to do the Maidan, 2014, or the full-scale invasion, or how much were these all accumulated 10 years, 15 or 20 years earlier, so that we don't overdo it. Because if we start that the volume is being done because of the law in the parliament, which almost seemed like at a certain point. I know if you listened at the beginning of the conference, that would have seemed like a crucial issue. Of course, we had because of the Butsurkiu lecture beginning it off. But I think we've got to both balance as to how much is the war we're dealing with and how much it is other religious changes that were going on in Ukraine otherwise. And the other is the level, when we talk about suspicion and not being able to get along, well, most of these heroic guys and women went out and joined together to defend Ukraine, ignoring most of these religious issues. There's specific issues for the pacifists and whatever. Do we at times, by looking at the churches or our theology or whatever, that we read more maybe of the anthropologists to tell us about how people are really dealing with these issues and how much did religion really matter for all kinds of social and cultural changes. And then the final one I would say is the Protestant issue. I know it comes up in the discussion of the communities in the archive, but I do think there's been a shift in public opinion in Ukraine about the Protestants tremendously, not in religious belief. And I don't know where that was in the conference, whether we really dealt with that anywhere. I don't know if that Ivan Fyodorov or Fedorov is what his religion is. I know Melitopol has those Protestant churches, but just to hear those people is, I think, tremendously changed, at least for me, but I would argue in Ukraine itself, what expectations are of religions in the Protestant groups.
That actually leads on to something that I was thinking about that we didn't really discuss, although it came up sort of by the by here and there, and it was a very important role of grassroots, again, religious groups and individuals in the whole initial crisis of all the refugee crisis at the beginning of the war. The Kyiv Institute of Sociology did focus groups in the fall of 2022, and one of the things those focus groups showed was, for example, the extensive involvement of Protestants in those evacuations and so on had raised people's opinion and had made people feel positive about them. One question I wrote down in my notes sometime today was, what did that experience of trusting one another and of social rallying at the beginning of the war, the full-scale invasion part of the war, is that something that these groups and that Ukrainian society can build on and use as experience of trusting one another? This sort of ongoing theme of the Maidan and of self-organization and of horizontal, I think that that's an important component that has changed some groups' perceptions of their role in society and that has potential for this kind of conversation that you and Tanya were talking about as well, to grow from that.
So 3 observations or thoughts. I'm happy to observe how the quality of reflection has risen. I was angry, I think, in the first first months of the war. We've been publishing a lot of articles about religion and war, but basically they were giving facts. You didn't have a lot of analysis, and now it's coming. So it's I think very interesting also to see where it is moving and what are the things to get in deeper. So it's reason for optimism. I'm sure what will come out of this will be much better than what we've seen so far. The second is that the situation with Ukrainian orthodoxy and legality, which I was sort of perceiving as a minority intuition that it's wrong the way it's going. Now, it looks like it almost a consensus, yes, among a lot of people who see the problem about, at least people who were in this room, no? We have a secret ballot at the end if you want. But at least like shared by many people. So it's an interesting, I think, observation, and it raises the question what to do with it, how to move with it, and what like responsibility of scholars to what is going on in Ukraine or in our country for those who are Ukrainians. And the third, which is related to this, is I think the discussion has sort of shifted. I don't know whether we had a paper on Ruski Mir or not. Like in the past, yes, what we would do, we would say it's Russia, Ruski Mir. Now it's much more self-critical in a way. It's not anymore like Russian world, Ukrainian moral high ground. We are asking, do we trust? Yes, as you did, Nick did. Do we have a state of law, as Metro did? Yes, do we have good governance? So we're starting asking questions about our own, whatever, Ukrainian Mir. As Father Cyril says, it's maybe a kairos, yes, the war makes changes possible. Yes, the calendar wouldn't be possible to change without war. I like this phrases of Heraclitus, who said like the polemos, the war is the king of all, because he can make free people into slaves and vice versa. So it's interesting to observe what is going on, and the changes will be really huge in one way or another. And it's scary almost, yes, how those changes can be huge.
I always enjoy these conferences. First of all, because we have too much critical scholars here. The positions of scholars very often opposite to what we heard from other scholars, I would say. At least scholars which I have in my bubble in Facebook. We have this critical about current state-church relations, right? We have critical what's going on with Ukrainian Orthodox Church. We are talking about instrumentalization of religion, but not only in Russia, but also in Ukraine. I know why some people do that in Ukraine, why our views are not similar, because they want to somehow to imply their knowledge, right? And from their use, the best way is to become like, warriors of ideological front, right? And probably they lose some boundaries. They lose these lines when they can follow. These conferences also was very important for me because we have these presentations of Tanya and Catherine, Igor, who show us that other ways how we can apply our academic knowledge, right? So it is not only about academic, scientific research, but some very, very particular, very real cases, how we can work for Ukraine, right? How we can save our heritage, work with people, right? And this is like applied dimension of what we are doing before the war.
I think that last point is a really important one. I think even with scholarship, when is neutrality? When neutrality means you don't do anything, that's just inherently a negative neutrality. And I think you're right, there's just a moment to act, and this is it. Having said that, the only thing I would say about the instrumentalization of religion, I think Ukraine is like every other place, right? I mean, in the US, we say religion is politics by other means. Of course, we have a plethora of religious groups, and they're all politically engaged and trying to, jockey for to advance their interests. But what's different is sometimes, within the context of war, I really think in many respects, the Russian Orthodox Church has opened up new frontiers in the worst kind of way with the kind of disinformation and all kinds of other things. So that's, I think, different. But the instrumentalization is, fortunately, unfortunately, I mean, that's just, religion has enormous persuasive and motivational powers. And that's whether you're talking about Ukraine, Russia, the US, or any other country. So Jeff had the great expression about religion having been captured by the political. And maybe that's a sort of a difference here, that it's the degree to which it's being, and the ways in which it's being instrumentalized is quite different.
To me, the most helpful was the presentation of Tatiana, because I realized that you can speak about personal things at the conference. Yes, yes. Yeah. A few times I caught myself on the thought, I mean, during the past 2 years, that if I would probably wish to become an anthropologist in a different life, but yeah, it's very interesting. Why I said this is because this conference is, to me, another step on finding meaning of where I am and what I'm doing. What struck me is when you said that, you got lost in terms of what were you doing and why, and then there was this point when it became clear to you through. Well, also it's a way, yeah. So I can say something personal too now. I've realized here especially that it's very difficult to be at the same time someone who is a scholar, a believer, who was and has been involved with the UOC, OCU, and Ecumenical Patriarchate, and I still parts of me identify with all three of them. And someone who tried to, or is trying to, be involved in peace building through the dialogue and action. Having all those three identities inside in different proportions at times. And at the same time, feeling what Nick described as this loss of trust and huge frustration in many things, but not wanting to get frustrated. During this conference, I've noticed that it was most easy and interesting for me to follow a presentation on the Jews, on the Muslims, on Greek Catholics, on the Protestants. It was super nice. And I was like, why don't we have more of this? It's so fascinating. And most difficult to listen to the UC-OCU issue. It was very helpful to hear the presentation of Dmitro. A part of me says, but it almost seems like there has never been a problem with the UC and they have always been a victim. And it doesn't mean that I support the bill, but I lacked a critical perspective, I guess. But I think it's trendy to have a critical perspective in the Facebook bubble. Yes, this is what you refer to. And here we should kind of discuss the post-critical or critical to critical perspective. But still, to me personally, it's not easy, I must admit. And I want to continue, but I cannot continue without kind of admitting the difficulty of it. However, I got some hints of what to do next. For example, I will help Andriy Fert with his research. It was very interesting for me to hear what he's doing. And I want to speak with Tanya about some thoughts on the continuation of dialogue, how and why. Yeah, but just wanted to say this. And of course, I'm very grateful to the organizers for this opportunity.
Thanks, Lydia, for saying that. Who said about canonical and anti-canonical? Yeah.
Neither is canonical.
I'd like to thank Regina for bringing in the topic of what actually was all the time in my head about the discrepancy of grassroots level studies as an anthropologist. So that's what I would like to dig deeper into grassroots level and the politics of religion. And when at the beginning of the conference, I just realized we're so different, the approach is so different, that how we would understand each other. And that was kind of my biggest concern. Does this conference make any meaning if we talk about the same issue, but from so different perspective? But in the end, it worked so well. It was so insightful, and no new insights. But I just would like to continue what Regina has started. That what we've seen from these studies, that sometimes the realities of this kind of the upper level institutional level, and the politics of religion and the grassroots life sometimes do not intersect at all. I would like to hear that we OCU, UC was kind of all the time as the kind of the main topic, but there was very little, almost nothing done from this conference about the grassroots level of these parishes. What's going on there? What kind of life and what kind of insights they can bring? Right. But yes, kind of very little. This is something that, from what I see, because if we talk about these realities and they do not intersect and they might not reflect each other, so we have to kind of dig deeper into that level. In terms of Protestants, I've been avoiding consciously dealing with major Protestant groups because of specific of my research. So what I was talking about was not reflecting the kind of the general Protestant situation in Ukraine, but at the same time, talking about these communities I've been working with, these pacifist communities, they have the same kind of parallel realities on the level of the the politics of religion. They are actually being even more marginalized than they were before because of their rejection to take up arms and to participate in the war the conventional way. On the grassroots level, that was the actors, the most active actors in rescue operation and humanitarian operations and everything. Yes, the kind of in these cases, again, we see the differences between what's going on the grassroots level and between what's going on in what we can read on, on Facebook or whatever. So this should be just more, we have to be careful with that and to see, I would like to see what's going on with mainstream Protestant communities as well.
Maybe, and I'm coming up with things that should be in. We had snippets about all of the Ukrainian refugees and what's happening abroad and how this affects it. You know, it came up with the issue, did the Protestants abroad affect your communities? We've seen it mentioned, can the OCU have parishes abroad? They seem to in the U.S. have many parishes, but not in Europe now, and we have to now explain these kind of things. But it'll also change, and the comment about there's no one left at home to do these things was the one that really struck me. And, you know, we will see how many people come back, what they will rebuild. But that's going to redo religious life, and the war did all of this. It's hard to add additional papers and works, but I think that's a theme that somehow has to be brought in.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really, I mean, obviously really hard to do ethnographic research for Ukrainians or for others, and I think that's where that's lacking. Having said that, with so many people abroad, now that starts to create other kinds of possibilities that, once again, is going to influence. I mean, I just add parenthetically, you know, looking at Orthodoxy, I was floored in Philadelphia, right in my own backyard. I found an Orthodox church that was under the Kiev Patriarchate, the Ecumenical Patriarchate, the Moscow Patriarchate, one that calls itself Pan-Orthodox, one that's under the Episcopalian Church. I mean, talk about, you know, we're all over the place. You know, once certain things get, the barriers to change begin to break too, and then people begin innovating. And so you have all kinds, and especially when there's levels of frustration. I think that's what speaks to it. People begin just doing what they want to do.
Just one more. Speaking with Thomas Bremer, he pointed out that the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church is remarkably well organized in Germany. And so you're getting people who want a Ukrainian church and are making that classic decision, will I go to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine under the Moscow Patriarchate, or will I go to the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church if you don't give me the other? And that's going to change their religious mentalities as well. You know, so even that structural organization and adding to it.
So maybe you want to say a few words about sort of publication and how that will unfold?
This is truly in the weeds. We will be sending you an email in the next couple of weeks with some plans. But just to give you the highlights, our plan is to invite everybody to take the thinking that you've had while you're here and the questions and the feedback home with you. And also, if you have further feedback to any of our members, go ahead and email our colleagues, and so that we can all work on the papers. Sean Patterson is going to be helping over here. Most of you have met, I think, a PhD student in my department. Sean is going to be working with Kathy and me on the publication project. And so those of you who are not native speakers, don't worry. Sean will be available to help you with some preliminary editing as you prepare the paper in this spring. And our goal is to have everybody submit the papers to Canadian Slavonic Paper by the end of June, so that we can get in the pipeline, get reviews back by the fall, and then we can get working on actually producing our publication. So that's the basic timeline. So as soon as the paper is ready, send it to us.
You don't have to wait till the end of June.
Please don't. These are the absolute deadlines. If you have time and want to just revise your paper right away and send it to us, Sean is available starting after the conference. So, you know, to help, and Kathy and I, of course, too. But we'll sort of stand back a little bit at the at this stage as you're preparing them for submission, but there is help to get there.
Maybe some know, maybe some don't know, just to sort of give you a sense as, once again, how the process works. Please send your paper whenever you would like it to be reviewed. Once again, it will go over we'll try to give you some feedback, initially at least, and then on ideas and on the content of your paper, and then some concrete feedback on language. And so once it gets submitted, then it will have to go out for review. So it will go out for review and be double-blind peer reviewed. What that means is that it will be sent to at least 2 reviewers. We will have to have in hand at least 2 reviews of your article. And people will issue their comments, their suggestions for revision, or perhaps not. Perhaps they'll say it's brilliant as it is. But the point is, it will go out to people we don't know, and we have no control over who is reviewing them and what they write. So we'll have 2 reviews for you, and then you'll be asked to revise. And then the idea is timeline, once again, if you submit it by June at the latest, it will go into the production process, will get reviewed over the summer, and then it will go into production, revision, production, come the fall. And the idea is it will be, once it's accepted, it gets published right away online, and then it will go into the winter 2023. That will be the first issue of the, sorry, yeah, that's right.
First issue of 2024.
Right, that's not last year, we're not, yes. Forgot the year, 2024, and then the one following that afterwards. One other.
It'll be a double issue.
Oh, one single issue? Oh, okay. One other final note. You saw how these great Canadians kept time. They're going to be even, journals are even more rigorous. In other words, the journal will come out. The good news about journals is for those of you who are timely in your submission, you don't have to worry. It will, in fact, come out. It will be published. It's totally non-negotiable timing-wise. But for those that are slow, it's not wasted effort, but we can always submit it as another consideration for Canadian Slavonic papers. But the journal will not wait in terms of, that's once again, it's totally out of our hands. So we'll send out a more detailed timeline, but the timeline will be non-negotiable, just so you know, going into all of this.
One final thing I'll say is that Canadian Slavonic Papers publishes articles online even before the issue appears. Once we've finished working with you and editing it and it's gone to them to be published, it will appear online and then it'll wait. But you can already show that you've got that article and share it with your colleagues and so on. So even if the issue is appearing in the first issue of 2024, your article, let's say we finish it and it goes into production. If it's done, it's already going to be available on the website. Just the issue won't have been published yet. So.
Open access.
No, unfortunately not. If you are at a university, and I looked and didn't find anybody's university having a deal with Taylor and Francis, but that changes all the time. So please do talk to your institutions if there is a means. Unfortunately, that was just too much money. And so what we're hoping for is that we can, there is a way with Rutledge which is related to Taylor and Francis. And what we're hoping is that we'll be able to pay less to have the whole book appear as an online book after it's a journal article.
We're hoping to get a 2-for-1.
Yeah.
Double this journal issue and then an open access.
Yeah.
1 or 3,000.
Yeah, it's $3,000 per article. We just couldn't raise that kind of money. But what we could do is raise enough money, we hope, for the open access book that will basically just take the journal issue and publish it as a book. That's our strategy. So we'll see what we can do, but we hope that we can pull that off.
And we hope that you'll work up your presentation into an article. That's the main thing.
Yes, that's the main thing, is that we hope that all of the really interesting material that we've had, and which has really been in great dialogue, I think all conference people have been saying, and I've been feeling that, each presentation built a brick, and somebody, I think it was you said it was like a mosaic, and the mosaic was coming together, and so I really hope that we can publish a full mosaic together.
I just have a question about an ethical question. So suppose I get as a blind reviewer to review. Do I have to disqualify myself because?
No.
Okay.
Don't even think about it.
No. Some of you may find yourself reviewing something, but you simply review it anonymously. You don't say, I was at the conference and boy, was he an idiot. No. Like, at this point, I just would like to say a few thank yous. First of all, I'd like to say that the conference is rooted in a partnership between CIUS's Religion and Culture program and the Working Group on Lived Religion in Eastern Europe and Eurasia. And so those are the major funders at the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies. That's the Religion and Culture Endowment, the Bukovsky Endowment, the Kolaski Endowment. We're all contributing to our conference. The project was supported by a Connections grant from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, and that was critical to allowing us to bring the exhibit here, as well as Ihor, and also is going to help us with our publication as well for hiring Sean. We also received grants from the Killam Research Fund, the Cool Institute for Advanced Study, the Department of History, Classics and Religion, all of those at the University of Alberta. And we also had some funding from the Emil and Elfriede Jochum Chair in Theology at Valparaiso University. So thank you very much to all of our funders. Then I want to thank all of the team at CIUS. I think you guys have been seeing the team that was behind this, but I want to name a few members of the team. First, I would like to thank Stefka Litvin, who who has been my partner since July. Every week we met, and every week we met more than once, even though we allegedly had a once-a-week meeting. I'd like to thank the Assistant Director Operations, Andrea Kopelec, who had the idea of Stefka and was behind all along. I'd like to thank the Assistant Director Research, Serhii Zipko, who also was supporting me. I'd like to thank Jen Fedun, who's also in Andrea's team. I want to thank our director, Natalia Hanenko-Friesen. Natalia supported the idea right from the start and became part of the collaborator on the Religion and Culture project as we moved along, and had the idea of visited the exhibit in Kyiv in the summer and emailed me and said, oh my gosh, we've got to do this as well. So thank you for all your enthusiasm and help. Other colleagues from CIUS who've helped out in various ways are Alexander Pankev and Larissa Bilus, Henry Prown, Ksenia Mariniak, Yaros Balan. If I've left your name out, I apologize. So thank you very much to the whole team. I'd also like to thank our colleagues from the Arts Resource Center. This is a wonderful center that supports research in the Faculty of Arts, or the whole technical side of research in the Faculty of Arts, and also from the very beginning of my idea, Claire and Grant have been really helpful with advice, and then they've been with us for the whole 3 days supporting this. So thanks. And finally, I'd like to thank our two graduate student assistants for the program, Sean Patterson and Anna Olenenko, for all of their support and for participating in the conference.